everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining today's panel discussion. I'm Tony Plahetsky. I'm going to be moderating this discussion. Obviously, across the state of Texas, we have all endured so much with the deep Texas freeze that killed dozens of people, left millions across the state without power. We are so fortunate to have an all-star cast today, two energy experts who are going to talk to us about what we have learned so far about the causes of the freeze and where we go from here as a state to prevent something like this from ever occurring again. We are also awaiting the arrival of State Representative Donna Howard. Oh, there she is. Hello, good morning. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
And so I want to take just a couple of minutes to introduce each of our guests, and then I'm going to invite them to spend about 90 seconds talking, in an opening statement, just in terms of where they are today. Obviously, this is a rolling situation. But what their thoughts are in the moment today, and then we'll plunge into a deeper conversation. But first, thank you so much, State Representative Donna Howard, for joining us. She is a well-known Austin state representative. She is a Democrat, and her district includes much of Travis County. Representative Howard serves on the House Appropriations and State Affairs Committee, and she, like so many lawmakers, have been participating in hearings related to the blackout over the past couple of weeks as lawmakers continue probes to try to learn exactly what happened and why. Robert Bryce is an Austinite as well. He is a journalist and an author here in Austin. His most recent book is called The Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. There it is. Thank you so much, Robert. He released the book last year, was published last year. He is also a frequent author whose works have been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and others, and he is a former senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Michael Jewell, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us as well. Michael Jewell is the managing partner of his own firm here in Austin, Jewell & Associates, and represents clients in front of the legislature on issues that include energy, electricity, and telecommunications. Michael Jewell is well known around the Capitol. He has been for many years now. He previously worked for then Governor George W. Bush as a liaison to the legislature on issues exactly like we are discussing here today, public utilities and other matters as well. We also, I just want to tell you, did invite State Representative Abel Herrero, who is the vice chair of the House Energy and Resources Committee. Unfortunately, he was not able to join us today. So State Representative Howard, it's all up to you to carry the torch for lawmakers here across the state in terms of what you all are up to. So if you don't mind, let's start with you, and just in about 90 seconds, if you can tell us, where you are today, what is your mindset today, what you've learned today, and what is the most urgent in your mind as a state lawmaker?
Well, thank you for inviting me to do this. And I won't purport to represent the entire legislature. There's obviously some differences of opinion here. That's definitely clear. And I'll try to keep it brief. It's very hard for me to do that. But Bottom line is, we have learned over the hours and hours and hours of testimony that we've had is that this is a multifaceted issue with a lot of different players, and everybody has a role to play in what happened. The bottom line is that we have had we knew from previous weather events that we needed to be taking some steps here. We didn't do some of those in terms of the weatherization. There was a lack of communication between the various entities involved. Left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, didn't know that gas plants needed to have electricity in order to get their gas to the electricity people. And it's just, the fingers pointing everywhere. The bottom line is, though, that the consumers are the ones that ended up suffering from this. And we now have some pricing issues that we're looking at to determine how can we best protect the consumer from also bearing the brunt of the costs that were involved here. And that's a lot of the debate that's going on right now. The fact is that we had a period of time, because we have this deregulated market with a market structure that is tries to incentivize generation production by really upping the prices to a very high price during scarcity times in order to try to get generation to be online for that. It also has the double purpose here of encouraging and incentivizing the large the large industrial users who are savvy to how this all works, to get them to, if they can, to go offline during that time to decrease the load. So all these different things are coming together. People like me are trying to learn all we can about this, with probably most of us not having all the necessary background that we would want to have here, but we're doing some quick studies here, trying to learn from the experts about what's going on and figure out how can we best make sure that we move forward with legislation that doesn't allow this to happen again, that protects the consumer as much as possible, and that ensures that we have a reliable energy grid that will withstand the weather events that we know we're going to continue to have now, and to do so in the most cost-effective way that we can. So lots of decisions that we need to be making here. State Affairs is going to be hearing multiple bills in the House on Thursday that address some of the solutions that we think will help us move forward.
State Representative, I know that you, like me, and so many of us, are really having to go from not knowing a lot at all about all of this to essentially getting a PhD on the fly here. Robert and Michael, I know, of course, you both have studied this and are very well versed. I want to just ask each of you for your sort of opening thoughts. Michael, we'll go to you first.
Thank you, Tony. And I got to say that for not having a PhD, Representative Howard clearly has got a good grasp of what's going on. And also proud to have been her constituent until recently when I moved, and still in the Austin area. But I mean, she hit the nail on the head when she said that this is a multifaceted issue, and everyone has got a role with regard to the tragedy that Texans have experienced. There was a cascade of issues, and every generation source ran into problems. Initially there was an effort to blame wind and solar and say that wind and solar generation was the big problem and why everything happened. But as the facts have been coming out, it's been increasingly clear that it's not just wind and solar. They had a role to play, but our thermal generation had a significant role to play. Analysis has shown that while wind and solar decreased their output about 1% during the storm event, thermal generation decreased its output by 25%. Excuse me. So clearly, everybody had issues. I think the other thing, that has really been highlighted by this event, and it was highlighted by prior weather events as well, is the interconnectedness between the natural gas industry and our electric industry. Bottom line, Texas is the electric industry in Texas is driven primarily by natural gas. We rely on a reliable supply of natural gas, and the cold weather that hit this state had a real adverse impact with regard to the availability of that supply. And ultimately, it became a very vicious cycle where, as power plants lost their ability to stay online, whether for weatherization issues or for natural gas supply issues, and the transmission and distribution utilities had to take load off the system. The fact that key components with regard to the natural gas industry had not registered to identify themselves as critical load, and they got shut off, it just became a vicious cycle back and forth. And that clearly is something that's got to be addressed during the session, and there's bills that are out there to be able to do that. So anyway, let me stop there and turn it over to Robert.
Yeah, Robert, thanks. I just want to hear, kind of like the other panelists, we're about a month out of this. Many of us are learning as we go, but you have studied these issues for many years now. So based on your learning about what happened today, what are some of your preliminary thoughts?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. Well, first, just one quick point. I'm a visiting fellow at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity here in Austin. So as far as my affiliation, I just wanted to make sure that FREOP gets the proper plug, because Ovik Roy has set up a great think tank here in Austin. I'm proud to be affiliated with them. So my quick points, what happened? Well, this is a very clear case of grid mismanagement, full stop. This was a market that was set up by the legislature that rewarded energy only. And why was it mismanaged? It was not designed or set up to reward resilience or reliability. So the legislature is going to have to fix this. They're going to have to implement some measures that are going to reward resilience and reliability. And that energy only market that was set up did not do that. Second, follow the money. This is the oldest maxim in politics. One quick other point, if I don't interrupt myself. It's imperative that we understand just how close the Texas grid was to collapse, the ERCOT grid. 26 million Texans on the morning of February 15th were about 4.5 minutes from being plunged into the dark. 10% of the U.S. economy was that close from being put into darkness at a time when we were facing sub-freezing weather, roads were impassable, and that would have been a catastrophic event, and thousands or perhaps tens of thousands of Texans would have died. So it's imperative that we understand that how close ERCOT came to a complete system black, which would have been taken weeks or perhaps months to recover from.
And Robert, I just to interrupt, I'm
Sure.
so glad you made that point, because it is a point that does seem to get lost in this conversation, and I think it's so terrifying. My own husband won't let me remind people of that, or even remind him of that, because it almost boggles the mind to think that we could have been in a terrifying, almost like a movie situation, where we could have potentially have had to evacuate most of the entire state. I mean, it would have had epic consequences, not only for Texas, but for the entire nation. So sorry to interrupt,
Exactly.
but I am glad to bring that point.
Yeah, it's imperative to underscore that point because of how close the grid came to total collapse and the difficulty that, and Bill Magnus at ERCOT made this point very clearly several times during the urgent board member meeting, which I think was February 24th, of the difficulty of trying to go from a black start situation on the ERCOT grid. Okay, so second, follow the money. You know, there's all this talk about, oh, well, don't blame renewables. Okay, well, I've been a longtime critic of the wind industry, and proudly so. Where was all the investment made in Texas? If you look at the data from ERCOT since 2015, over 16,000 megawatts of renewable energy renewable capacity was added to the grid, and only about 2,000 megawatts of natural gas. Some $65 billion. So this is the wind industry's own numbers and the solar industry's own numbers. $65 billion was spent on renewables in Texas over roughly the last 15 years. And effectively, none of that value, none of that $65 billion was worth a dime at about 2 a.m. on February 15th when the system was about to collapse. And I can talk more about that. So, but to Representative Howard's point, my last point, what's next? Well, I fear that the costs are going to roll downhill and low and middle income consumers are going to be hit the hardest. And the legislature is going to have to figure something out here. But I think that this is already clear. This is what always happens is the ratepayers bear the brunt when there's a grid mismanagement like what we've seen.
I know this may seem overly elementary to people who have been closely following this, but for those who were in the dark, frankly, when all of this was unfolding and are just now learning, can we just rewind the tape significantly? I know, Representative Howard, you were not yet in the House when all of this got done, but can one of you, maybe Michael, you can start with this. Texas is different than any other state in the nation with regard to how it operates electricity and provides electricity across the state. Again, without getting too technical, can you just break that down for us in simple terms, how that is and why that came to be?
Yeah, so Tony, you're right. Texas is very unique. And in the United States, there are three basic grids. There's the Eastern grid, there's the Western grid, there's Texas. Texas stands alone with its own grid, and we're the only state that has that. There are a few connections between the ERCOT grid and both the East and the West. Very minimal amount of energy is able to go through there. That is something that has been very closely guarded by the electric industry, by key consumer groups, and primarily industrial groups, in order to maintain the regulatory oversight of ERCOT within the state at the Public Utility Commission. This is one of those. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but who in Texas and why said this is a good idea for Texas? This is what we want to do. I want people to understand the real kind of evolution of that.
I'd say I was not working on electric issues at the time that decision was made, so I couldn't say exactly who. But at the same time, I think that Texas is very proud. Texas is very independent. Texas wants to control its own destiny in so many ways, whether for better or for worse. And this clearly is one of those times where there's a downside to that level of independence. At the same time, part of the reason that people say that this has been a good thing for Texas is that because the Public Utility Commission, the legislature, control the Texas grid and are able to make decisions with regard to that, to the development of the grid, we are not constrained by what other states are saying with regard to what we can or can't do. With regard to the development of large-scale transmission to better build out the west and the side of the grid, other states have tried to be able to increase the ability to move large amounts of wind and solar energy across the nation. Texas is the only one that was able to do that because of the fact that it was a decision that was made in Texas and not constrained by by other states and a lot of jurisdictional disputes that have taken place.
Representative Howard, did the state simply get it wrong years ago when they did this, or was it the right thing to do at the time with unforeseen circumstances, or was it the right thing to do at the time and it's just been improperly managed in the subsequent years?
It's hard for me to answer this. Other than to say, there was obviously a decision made to deregulate, to have a competitive market, and to let the market incentivize the system to be reliable, and that worked until it didn't. And I think even in the testimony that we've had from those that are very supportive of a market-driven system, they themselves were saying in testimony, I never could have imagined this. We've got to do something differently. What that means, I'm not sure yet. I think that's probably what we're still looking at here. We've been talking about an energy-only market system, which only buys the energy when you need it instead of a capacity-driven market system, which ensures that you have some reserves on hand, and you pay for that. Whether or not there's a hybrid there, I don't know. That's what we're trying to figure out here. How much do we need to look at the way that this market-driven system is or is not working? One of the problems that we've had is that we've capped the electricity prices, but we don't cap the gas prices. That's a commodity. And when you're having this market-driven system that's looking at a high artificial price to address scarcity, to incentivize that we're going to be reliable during that scarce time, you got to take into account the high cost of gas that happened at the same time, and that makes this market-driven system a little awkward. And really, we've been focused a lot on PUC and ERCOT and very little on the Railroad Commission and what's going on with gas. And we've got to make sure we're looking at the whole interconnected system. It is not in silos. They are totally interconnected, and we have got to address this as a whole.
Robert, just in the spirit of, don't want to spend too much more time on this because I want to move forward. But yeah, I want to ask you sort of the same question that I asked Representative Howard. Did the state get this wrong, or was the state well-intentioned and things have just fallen into place to make this all almost collapse a month ago?
You're muted.
Oh, can you hear me? You can't hear me?
No, I am. I'm sorry. I muted myself. To build on Representative Howard's point and also what Mr. Jewell said was that, yes, it's clear it's the natural gas grid and the electric grid in Texas have merged. They are interdependent, and that has to be understood by the legislature very clearly. But to answer your question, Tony, This was a fundamental misunderstanding of the importance of the electric grid by legislators when they set up this market. The electric grid is the mother network. It's the network upon which all of our modern society depends. And there was a misunderstanding that, oh, it's a commodity. Well, no, the idea that you just sell watt hours is not sufficient to understand the importance of the network itself. Electricity ain't hamburger. It ain't tortillas. This is a system that has to be super reliable and super resilient. It's a service more than it is a commodity.
Managed, right? And super managed. And super managed.
Exactly. And now we've created a system where the buck doesn't stop anywhere. And that's a problem. A couple of other quick points, which we haven't mentioned yet, which is nuclear capacity. The nuclear generation in the state was by far the most resilient and reliable form of generation that we've had. I'm adamantly pro-nuclear. If we're anti-carbon dioxide and anti-nuclear, you're pro-blackout. The state needs more nuclear capacity. We put too much emphasis on intermittent renewables and not nearly enough on reliable sources of generation that have on-site fuel. And in particular, to me, that means nuclear.
But at the same time, nuclear itself also had a problem. We lost a nuclear unit because of weatherization problems as well.
No, that's a fair point. And it's also clear that to add to the scary point that Tony mentioned earlier, the CEO of Vistra, his name doesn't come to mind. I think Representative Howard, you may have been in that hearing. He said that the Comanche Peak reactors were about 3 minutes away from tripping off. So, I mean, all of it, I mean, I can scare myself to death if I think about it too much. But yes, I mean, every form of generation has its upside and downside, but the resilience factor, I think one key issue is having on-site fuel.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I always wanted to tag onto that too. What I'm learning too is the redundancy and dual fuel and reserves on site. A lot of things that were happening back when we had the vertical system where everybody did the generation, the retail, the whole works, and that we deregulated. They used to have all of this in place, and that didn't continue to happen with the kind of market that we had. But we've got to have some kind of backup plan in place to serve us when we do get into these stressful situations.
And one thing I'd add is as we're thinking about this, we've got to remember that demand is 50% of the equation. We build all the generation and manage it and operate it in order to serve demand. We've got to be also working on ensuring that we have demand reduction capability in order to reduce the times of peak demand. And that is one of those things that continues to grow, but a lot of emphasis needs to be placed on that as well, because there's a lot of companies that are able to reduce their load. More than 50% of peak demand in the summer is residential air conditioning. That's a huge opportunity. This is part of what needs to be the focus as well.
So again, the fixing of all of this, I mean, they're the most immediate solutions, and I want to talk about those, and I know many of those are being considered right now by the legislature, and perhaps, Representative, you can start here. What are the most immediate fixes that have got to be taken in your mind urgently with regard to the grid itself, and then also management? I mean, we're seeing this churn in terms of the management of ERCOT and also PUC as well.
Well, I just want to say, in terms of management of the grid, I'm probably not as critical of what happened as some might be. Everything I heard, ERCOT was paying attention to what was going on based on what they knew, made decisions, and it could be debated as to whether or not the decisions were made quickly enough or whatever. And there's going to be some auditing of that done by people who actually know the field rather than legislators who do not. And we'll see what happened there. But the bottom line is decisions had to be made quickly. And there was a huge drop off of companies that were producing energy in that very 4.5 minute period of time that's been mentioned earlier. And we were on the brink of a total blackout, which would have been devastating to people and their lives, and also to our economy if that had happened. So that being said, we're also then the other big issue that we're looking at, and that needs to be corrected if you're looking for solutions here, is the so-called repricing, to look at a period of time after ERCOT stopped ordering the utilities to download, to shed load, and we keep using these terms, but to cut us off, basically.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, and so that when that happened, supposedly they were supposed to decrease that $9,000 price and go back to a lower price, the market price, and that did not happen. And the reason it didn't happen, according to ERCOT, is because they were looking at the forecasts of having another huge amount of load come online the next morning that would have potentially thrown us back into another outage, and they were trying to avoid that. And they were using the market to try to keep the plants online to deliver what needed to be delivered so that we wouldn't have that happen again. So that being said, part of what I'm trying to say here is that ERCOT and PUC, they've been fired or resigned as if that's going to solve the problem, and it is not. That's not the problem. The problem is about how this is all set up. So we're looking at things about communication, for one thing. These entities have got to communicate with one another. That's an absolute imperative. Looking at how we can do some kind of securitization or whatever it ends up being of the so-called overcharges that occurred, so that it's not a big, huge blunt for the local utilities and ultimately for the consumers, and how we make that happen. Looking supposedly at gas a little bit, I think we need to do some more there. There's actually a huge package of bills, and we can go through this if you want to, but the bottom line is that we've got to look at how we're communicating with one another, how we're recognizing that there's an interdependence here, and ensuring that that ERCOT, PUC, and the Railroad Commission are looking at how we can require weatherization, how that can be built in, how we can plan for, anticipate, and be prepared for the weather events that are going to ultimately continue to occur.
And Michael and Robert, to her point, communication does not cost a lot of money, and it's something that can be solved and fixed really right away. You can put a new communication plan in place. Just kind of teeing off that, and with regard to what can be done urgently, and then of course I want to shift the conversation to what can be done in the months and even years to come. But in both of your minds, what can be and should be done within the next month to ensure that this never happens again?
So one of the things, clearly communication is part of the issue, because that was a real problem throughout the event. Another thing that is very critical to address in the near term is weatherization. This is something that came out in 2011 after the freeze that we had there, and the fact that there's problems with regard to the weatherization of generation. But while the knee-jerk reaction is to say, oh, well, we got to weatherize everything, we've also got to be smart with regard to weatherization. Because if you weatherize for extreme cold, you may eliminate the ability of those very plants that you've weatherized to be able to operate in the summer. So there's got to be smart weatherization. It's got to be a Texas approach to deal with the kind of issues that we've got here. And it's got to be not only the generation, but it's got to be the gas supply. If we're going to be relying on the gas industry and a gas supply that is just
Now I'm freezing up. Hello?
We're all freezing up. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Robert, can you hear us?
Yeah. Yes, I can. Thank you. So, well, I can just build on Michael's point just a little bit, which is, well, so where are the incentives here? And again, just if we follow the money and you look at where was the money spent and for what? Well, I recently wrote a piece in Forbes about federal tax incentives. Now, these are federal tax incentives, but there are also state tax incentives that the solar industry in federal tax incentives gets 70 times more than hydrocarbons. The wind industry gets 44 times more on an energy equivalent basis than hydrocarbons. So there's this pointing at fingers at the natural gas industry. Well, where were the incentives for them, for those gas producers, gas processors, gas pipelines, they're going to have to get some kind of love here, some kind of economic incentive to do that weatherization, to ensure capacity. These are the things that are going to be difficult to deal with because there is let's be clear, the solar and wind lobbies are very strong. Of course, the natural gas and the oil industry have strong lobbies in Texas as well. But the state is going to have to figure out, how do you reward resilience and reliability? Two other quick points here, which I think are essential to understand, is that one of the reasons why demand during the cold in the state use electric heating. If we had a more diverse energy supply in terms of heating, that would lead to better resilience.
Yeah, with regard to, I mean, it seems like what consumers want to know going forward is that the lights are going to turn on when they turn them on, and that they're not going to have to pay out the wazoo for that. How do you do these things that have got to be done? We now know that we no longer have a choice. They have got to be done. Yes, who is going to shoulder the cost for all of that, and the extent to which or not that gets passed on to consumers? How do you accomplish all of this without making the light bill go up?
Well, one would have thought that a $9,000 price for being available would be a very strong incentive for power plants to be sure that they're able to operate. That is an incentive for weatherization. And, that incentive does not carry over to the natural gas industry right now. But there clearly is a financial incentive for other generation resources to be able to weatherize.
Well, if I can jump in for just a moment there, but it's clear, and Bill Magnus made this point, that despite the $9,000 price, and which was supposed to incentivize new generation to come into the system, that didn't happen. There wasn't any more generation that came online once they increased the price. Therefore, I think Representative Howard makes a good point. Well, if you didn't have more generation come online, why did it stay at 9,000 then for 3 days? And shouldn't that price be rolled back or clawed back in some way or another? And that goes to the point which we haven't talked about at all, which is, where did the money go? Who made the money out of this $50 billion in invoicing? Now, whether it was actual sales or not, we don't know. But who made the money? There are rumors that LCRA made several $100 million in ancillary services, and yet we don't know exactly.
No, and I think that that's something that's still going to come to light. Shortly afterwards, we did see some reports of some executives saying that they had hit the jackpot, and it didn't seem to be electric executives that were making that comment. So I think that there's still a lot to be able to learn there.
But let me just say too about the repricing, which I think you're referring to here. I have not made a conclusion about that yet based on what I'm hearing in testimony. And I can tell you that what happens to my constituents here in Austin Energy, is that Austin Energy, yes, did make some money off of what happened because Austin Energy continued to produce
power,
energy, generation. And they had done weatherization. They were able to stay online. They lost some, with the South Texas nuclear project, that sort of thing. But by and large, they were one of the groups contributing to the electric grid, making sure that there was power for the entire state, even though we were being required by ERCOT to shed a certain amount of load, we were still selling to the grid. And so Austin Energy actually made money. If repricing occurs and they have clawbacks of some of the money that they made, their projections are that they would then be in the negative. So this is the whole thing of winners and losers, no matter what we do here. And when you're talking about how do we pay for this and how do the consumers benefit from this, I have a breakdown of the average costs of the state per kilowatt hour and what Austin Energy rates are over the past maybe 15 years, whatever it is, many years. Austin Energy's is by far lower than the state average in the competitive market over that period of time. And when they make money, the shareholders in this case are Austin Energy customers. And the money gets put back into the weatherization and or the rates that are set in the rate hearing. So, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I don't know enough about it to do that. I'm just saying that we do have some examples. El Paso weatherized, and they got through this a lot better, not being a part of ERCOT. There are ways that we can ensure that weatherization occurs, and that's part of some of the legislation that's being presented, and figure out a way to pay for it. Let me just say one more thing. Texas, by and large, really is big on saying we have low taxes, and that's true. But we also have low services a lot of times. And the fact is, you have to pay a certain amount to get the things that you want. And we've got to get out of the political rhetoric of only talking about low taxes and cutting costs. We've got to also talk about what is it that Texans expect us to provide. They want to turn their lights on. They want to turn the heat on. They want to turn the air conditioners on. And we want to do that in the most cost-effective way, but we can't get something for nothing. We've got to figure out how to fairly get a system in place that is not overburdening the customer, but is giving them what they want at the same time.
I know that we only have a couple of more minutes left, and Representative Howard, I know you specifically need to get back out to the floor, but I do want to ask. I mean, we are seeing over time and over the past several years more and more significant, unprecedented weather events. If we have an epic, summer that record high temperatures off the charts, many days of 100 plus degree temperatures across the state. Is the state prepared to handle that? And as importantly, if we have in February 2022 another huge winter storm similar to the one we saw, is there enough time to ensure that we will be prepared for that in 11 months from now?
Are you asking that to me, to Representative Howard?
I'm asking everybody their opinion about that. Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing is going to be for the legislature to really be clear about fuel diversity. Winston Churchill's famous quote was something to the effect of, energy security lies in diversity and diversity alone. And it's a dirty word to say, but does it make sense for the state to continue shutting down its coal resources? The coal-fired power plants were also in second in terms of resilience or reliability during the blackouts after nuclear. So the city of Austin owns part of the Fayette coal plant. Are they going to continue to sell that or shut it down? Given the importance of having resilient and reliable electricity during these kind of cold weather events, I think that's an important question to ask. And whether, in fact, we've had too much emphasis on decarbonization and not enough on resilience and reliability. And one final point, which is that I think that to Representative Howard's point, did deregulation really help the consumer? And I think that's a really important question to ask, because we're at a point now where the buck doesn't stop anywhere, and everyone's pointing fingers at each other saying, well, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. And if that's the case, then yeah, we may need some more significant regulations so that we have a more resilient and reliable grid.
And let me just respond to that too, because Commissioner DeAndrea, who just yesterday, I guess it is now, it's hard to keep up with all the resignations, but the lone remaining commissioner on the PUC who resigned yesterday was questioned the other day by the lieutenant governor, who in an unprecedented way went on into a committee hearing to directly question the witness, and asked Commissioner DeAndrea, why didn't you let the market just be the market in terms of continuing the $9,000 prices? And his response to him was, because the market was killing Texans. Texans were dying in their homes. And I think we have to look at the overarching thing we have to look at here is, indeed, Texans lost their lives in this event. This is not just about markets and money. This is about Texans' lives. And we cannot let that leave the forefront of the debate that we're having over this whole entire issue.
Michael?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that becomes the absolute number one thing that we've got to think about is this is about life. This is about safety. And to your question of what can we do in order to deal with a really hot summer that could become our new norm, really cold winters that could become our new norm. it takes years to build power plants. Absolutely. So we've got to think about what are the fastest things that we can do. Fastest things we can do. Work on weatherization. Be sure that we have dealt with that. Work on communication. Be sure that we know the critical infrastructure that cannot be rolled off. And then also demand response. This is, remarkably overlooked, but to the extent that we can manage demand, especially at these peak times, we are able to avoid more drastic situations. And demand response has been very beneficial. Previously, 2014, for example, it actually helped avoid rolling blackouts by the people who are already ready to and did reduce their load on demand. So these are the near-term things that we ought to be thinking about.
Important conversations that obviously, as we know, are not going to certainly stop today or even at the end of the legislative session, whenever that may be. Of course, we all know the end of May, but there are indications that
Don't say that, Tony.
I'm sorry that it could go on. That it could go on for a while. But I hope this has been an important conversation and meaningful and educational to our viewers out there. I want to thank each of you for joining us. State Representative Donna Howard, Michael Jewell, Robert Bryce, thank you so much. And of course, as time goes by, we would like to reserve the opportunity to maybe reassemble at some point to keep the public informed on what exactly is happening. So thanks again to you all, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tony.